So I can hear myself, but I can't hear Zip Zip. Can anyone else hear me? Okay, so I don't know what's happened to my Discord, but the conversation's still there. Hello, hello?
Hey, keep shutting down the government and blame the Republicans because it will be their fault because they're not going to give you what you want. So, like, I don't know now in January what the plan is. Like, are you just going to cave again? If that's the case, then don't do it. But um, if the plan is, hey, this time we're for real going to shut down until we get the Obamacare tax credits, then fuck it, do it. But I just don't know.
Well, I mean, I will slightly push back just to say that I would be okay if there was a strategy of like we're going to get to January, get some concessions that we want, and then force it so that the shutdown happens right before midterms, right? Like, like that was
Sure.
why I like the Schumer like, oh, we're just going to extend it for 1 year so that this comes up before midterms. I was like, yeah, hell
Yeah,
yeah, like
maybe.
that's a really good strategy. I don't know if they could force that in January or how they would get to that point, but like if I saw them doing something like that, I'd be like, okay, yeah, that's a really good way
Also,
to do
I
it.
could very much like get behind a strategy of here's the plan. Every time there's a new vote to reopen the government, we're gonna shut it down, and then we're gonna get some concessions from them, and then we'll reopen. And then that's
Yeah,
just how they do. Because and that makes sense as a strategy because without doing that, you don't have leverage to actually get anything you want and actually help the American people from the Republicans literally just harming and harming and harming and harming Americans. If that's strategy, fuck it, do that. Like every 2 months,
yeah.
you're gonna have a shutdown for a month until the Republicans give you something that you want, until they give some concessions, even if it's not like the maximum you want, which is the Obamacare tax credits or whatever it would be in the future. Get some concessions. If that's the strategy, fuck it, do that. I'm with that.
I mean,
Um,
it's more than they've been. It would be more than what they'd be able to do otherwise, right? Like
exactly.
actually
Yeah.
getting it. But then, like, I would also say, like, I know there's a lot of people out there like, I can't believe we're fucking using poor people's food and healthcare as bargaining chips. Blah 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 blah. Blah. That is people that are unserious about how politics work. And if
Mm-hmm.
you are upset about that, then stop watching politics because that's
Hmm.
literally the point of politics is to deal with really complicated stuff like
Yeah.
that and people get hurt. That's why you know what people should
That's
show
why
up
it's
and
so
vote.
bad, and Republicans are so bad, and
Well,
should
and
be
it's
helping more.
this is a if you are upset about this, pay attention to your elections, show up and vote for the people that will not that will not put us in positions where those
Mm-hmm.
have to be bargaining chips because
Hmm.
whenever we have Democrats in power, they were not coming in and saying to Republicans, guess what? We're going to cut all funding to red states so we can get what we want. They came in and were actually trying to run the government correctly, be bipartisan, whether that was smart or not, but they tried to do that. And so the idea that, like, oh, I can't believe that the Democrats would like gamble with this stuff. It's like, well, guess what? They're sitting at the table. That's the chips they have.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you don't want it to be that, get out there and elect people to make it so that this doesn't have to be an argument
Mm-hmm.
where healthcare is no. Healthcare is defended by 67% of the Senate and the House. So that is not even on the table for you guys to negotiate for. Sorry, you've got to negotiate for other bullshit. Okay. But that's why we are where we are. It's not that like the Democrats are like cruel or they are like cynical in some way that makes them like they're happy to see
The,
poor people hurt.
Destiny's will often made this point that the media is nearly always going to portray, or the right wing media, which is a hell of a lot of the American media, is going to portray the Democrats as evil and conniving and all this kind of stuff. They're going to do it anyway, right? But the truth, I mean, I wish I prepared actually more for this debate today. Than I have done. It's always the sensation I have with the writing as well for when we write for the pragmatic papers. Um, but even in the kind of just scratching the surface, this goes back before Trump, and yeah, this goes back, I mean, to the 2000 election, right? To the Florida recount and how Democrats reacted to that. They were too soft, and Republicans already at that stage were trying to bend the rules, not effectively cooperating. They had already ceased to cooperate in some ways in that point. Now, goes back to the theory I was hopefully going to reflect on in the debate, but there are other more complicated models than just the effective reiterative prisoner dilemma, where you have degrees of cooperation and degrees of non-cooperation, right? Which is a bit more like reality, right? And in this case, some of the most effective strategies is when the other party non-cooperates, you're meant to non-cooperate even more strongly, right? Which sounds escalatory, but these strategies aren't about ultimate destruction. They're actually about maximizing cooperation, because that helps, everyone wins in the end, right? So this goes back to, I think, a point that Kafka is making about not understanding how politics works. And ultimately, it's not understanding how these strategies work if you think that you're just going to continually avoid harm all the time, right? It's a bit like Ukraine defending itself. If you follow capitulation this way, Ukraine should just bend over, right? And we understand that in the longer term would lead to more suffering than if now we put up a stand. But we will also see in the Ukrainian situation that if you leave it too late, the more hurt and the more suffering will come as a result, right? If Ukraine had been really reinforced after 2014, when Russia had already invaded, and the country, I live in Germany now, and people don't like Merkel for this. She continued to buy Russian gas, expanded plans for Russian gas purchases. So it's a terrible move. It's not just cooperating, it's like increasing your cooperation after a non-cooperative act. And so she has a role and responsibility in the might of Russia that was allowed to form, right? And because we were just avoiding any type of conflict, but you actually can increase overall what level of conflict you experience by doing so. And it's happening in American politics, it's happening in British politics, it's happening across Europe, I'm afraid. And part of that is not looking strategically at some levels of compromise in terms of some levels of suffering, like this shutdown. I'm really, to give my opinion on the matter, the rhetoric and the fact that they didn't vote in accordance was pretty bad. But overall, this was better than avoiding a shutdown completely. And I think the Dems need to be, congratulated a little bit on getting a backbone finally, because I have pages here in front of me where they never had a backbone, and there's a little bit of backbone. So let's not be too hard on them. And Schumer as well, who he could have shut down earlier this year, right? And he avoided it then, and maybe he got it right. Maybe he got it right, because it was like maybe he's starting off a new game. And tit for tat is about starting with cooperation at first. Okay, I'm going to cooperate with you, but if you don't cooperate next turn, I'm not going to cooperate. So maybe actually, this year, Dems haven't done too badly. And instead of looking at the mistakes they've made, we should also look at the things they've done right. And I think there are good examples of that.
So I would love to know what you think, Reese, and maybe Kafka, if you also want to chime in, or DRT if you don't. But I at the time of earlier this year, when people were asking, "Hey, shut down the government if you don't get it," and then mostly Democrats didn't do that. I was on the side of, yeah, fuck it, shut down the government. I think it was bad strategy to have complied, because the immediate argument right after was, "Oh, look, the Democrats agreed to this, whatever," and then once the shutdown was coming around, it was the Democrats agreed to this a few months ago, but now they suddenly have an issue with it, right? And I think it hurts you on that front. Do you think that, I think the timing works out better to have done it closer now versus if it had happened months ago, but I don't think, I'm not sure. I think it still would have been fine to have shut down the government then, but I also wonder if it would have reopened and way earlier, and then I have no idea. I don't know what would have happened in that case, but I don't know.
Like if we'd if it only been for like a week or 2 weeks, or just so they had capitulated immediately, I think
Yeah.
they would have. I think that would have been bad. I think that people
Mhm.
wouldn't have paid attention in the way that they did now. I do think that the pain that's being felt by many people from it is going to make them remember it. And if in the short term they blame the Democrats, okay, fine. But here's the deal: I don't think people are going to blame the Democrats and go, and that's why I'm not going to support the Democrats. I think that's going to make them go, and that's why I'm going to shit heavily all over people that do betray us, and I'm going to scream at the Democrats to fight instead of capitulate next time. As much as people want to act like, oh, I'm going to give up on this stuff, like, sorry, you lost your food, you're losing your health care, you're spending way too much on it now. You do not have the option to check out, because this is a borderline existential crisis for a lot of these people. This needs to be their signal to engage and to start supporting. And it doesn't. I'm not talking about monetary. You can just be like even just vocal support, but like this is the signal you need to start engaging, or else your life is going to start getting worse. And I think people are going to rise to that. I do. And call me soy, call me full of copium, but I do. I think this is the pain that people felt, even if it was for just a little bit, might be a wake up call of like, oh shit, no, this is real.
And to be honest,
I think it still works in our favor, but I think it wasn't like pure 100% victory. I think there was
Yeah,
like
that's fair.
big. I think I don't know. I mean, I think it's true. Like what people have been saying, like this reinforces every stereotype about Democrats that Democrats should be trying to fight as hard as possible right now, which is Dems can't govern and hate themselves and are too
Well, okay.
divided and shit like that. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I understand that people want to like come out and push those memes, and you know what, congrats to all those people for supporting communism. But I'm sorry, there were 8 Democrats that did this. That's it. You want to shit on them, shit on them. The rest of the party has a ton of them have come out and expressed how upset they are. Most of the people in the House have come out and expressed how upset they are. So you know what? It sucks that all these people aren't mind controlled together in some kind of CCP or MAGA party. Sorry that we have a party of people with brains and have their own independent things, and sometimes that works against us like this. But you know what? Go scream into a pillow for a little bit and come back and act like an adult so that we can actually try to help people instead of just sitting here and just getting memes on Twitter to get big. That's it.
yeah, you could turn it around and say there's
mm,
never going to be a consensus in a party where people feel open and ability to voice their genuine opinions, right? You experience consensus in a dictatorship, and that's it. So the fact that there are 8 voices that didn't really agree with the party line, um, is actually a really good turnout. I didn't even realize it was single digits. I would turn it around in that way and say that's an overwhelming majority who
mm,
supported ending it, right? So I, I think that's the best way to turn it around. But there is this. I mean, that's another thing. I want to get a paper or an article written on this for the pragmatic papers because you have this game theoretic aspect to it, but of course, it's not everything. And there's studies on political psychology that show you have to be very careful with populism because it's really very snowflakey and it's trying to victimize, self-victimize and say, look at me, look, we're really fighting. That's why they always have to be the outsiders draining the swamp, right? Because that's the narrative populism needs to survive. It's like a leech that lives off that narrative. And so you have to be very careful with not cooperating, that it isn't overly aggressive or that the narrative and the framing doesn't become something of scary violence or something like this. Not only is that not actually effective practically, the optics and the rhetoric is really dangerous with populism and it can actually have the opposite effect. So there is an argument to be made and that does need to be taken account of. So the article is the idea is behind quiet non-cooperation is the term I'm going to use, which is the idea that you non-cooperate, but you don't keep exemplifying that you're punishing the other side. You try and turn it around and say, well, actually, they're doing this. It's their responsibility. Their actions have led to this situation. And again, I think the Dems did pretty well during the shutdown, saying, well, he's in charge. And there was the meme going around or the video of Trump saying when he wasn't in office, well, if it's a shutdown, then the president's responsible. And that's the
yeah,
exact way to do it. There's
yeah,
no
and
way they can
that's been
victimize.
happening.
It's brilliant work doing that. So
Like Democrats were doing really really well on all the messaging during the shutdown. Everybody was together. Everybody was on the same message. They just on Republicans. Republicans' fault because they're not. Because they want to take healthcare away from the American people, and the Democrats won't stand for that. Um, it's the responsibility of the party in power when there's a shutdown. As you can see from Trump's words, he said it himself. Republicans like Democrats were like reposting like Republicans from like tweets from years ago saying like, oh, it's the fault of it's Biden's fault that there's gonna be a shutdown or whatever, like shit like that. Um, and it was like really good. Like Democrats like, and we can see the consequences of such, which is the crazy election went. Like the messaging for the shutdown was really really good, and it wasn't just like political apathy where people were like, "Oh, I'm not going to get involved." And it was people voted for Democrats instead. Democrats won elections in crazy places that we didn't even expect them to win, and won elections by crazy margins. Like it was really, really going positively for Democrats. But now the argument is then that it would have like the support would have started sliding if it had gone on for longer, or whatever. But I think I don't know if they should have quit while they were ahead. Maybe.
yeah, what is
Um,
it? Sorry.
One thing real quick, reasons of what you said. I think what you said, I generally agree with what you're saying there. However, I would also kind of point something out that um, I've been seeing a lot more recently, and there's an essay that I read a long time ago. I can't remember the name of it, but it talked about how a big issue for fascists is that they have to that they act like fools, and they'll troll and do all these things to tire the other side out. But whenever they are expressing power, they want to be taken very seriously. And so, a really great way to undermine them is to kind of show how ridiculous they're being, or just be ridiculous in response to it and not take them seriously. So, like for instance, like famously Tim Waltz calling them weird, right? Went over, had a lot of big responses, right? But even like more recently, the Seattle, I believe it is Seattle or Portland protests, where we have the inflatable dinosaur guys showing up to those protests, right? Like
Well,
those
the
are
inflatable frog guys. There's a
sure.
frog.
Those
They
are
win.
actually really important because one, they were nonviolent and they were showings of resistance, but also it makes it so that whenever they try to take their propaganda videos and propaganda pictures, it is impossible to take that situation seriously. It's one thing to say, oh look, these people were being nonviolent, so obviously you're the aggressor. Yeah, that works in some cases, but for a lot of times the fascists, as we know, will just lie and just make up what they want to show, yeah, hey, actually we did need to do it. However, whenever you're making these very ridiculous, very like silly images, and they come and go, that guy in the inflatable penis costume actually was a deadly threat to our agents, right? It's similar in the recent sandwich case where like the guy threw the sandwich, and like people were mocking the shit out of the trial. People thought it was ridiculous and silly, and it's like those cut so deep on people like Trump, like Stephen Miller, and people in that administration, because at the core, they want their power to be taken seriously, and when you show them to be ridiculous and silly, and you make it where they can't reframe away from that kind of ridiculousness, it really gets to them, and it really gets to them because it's so plainly obvious that extreme violence to something like that, like arrest or like physical altercations, things like that, is so clearly wrong. It's the thing where it's like someone beating up a clown because the clown sprayed water or whatever. It's like that guy's obviously in the wrong. Maybe the clown even was like did spray water on that guy and the guy didn't like it, but everyone's gonna be like, why are you hitting this clown?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Or
Right?
like, fabricating a whole perp walk and sending a whole camera crew to arrest a guy from his house who said he would turn himself in for throwing a sandwich at a guy in full body armor. Maybe.
Right. And so I would say like one part of it is like it doesn't take anything away from what you said at all. It's just something that also like I'd like to point out that like there is nonviolence, there is civil disobedience, but I think that there needs to be some kind of examination of the category of being silly and ridiculous in the face of fascism, and just really taking the air out of the room for them, just making it impossible for them to be taken seriously.
It's an IRL meme, right? We're memeing it live in real life, right? And I think it suits the modern context for a form of disobedience. It also, by framing what they say as silly, it kind of it gets people to stop really listening to them. And they also can't really complain about it. They can't victimize about it, go, so long as it's silly enough to be entirely harmless. I think the whole balloon thing started when Trump, in his first term, he came to London, and there was this massive balloon of Trump as a baby.
I remember this.
Yeah. I think it set a precedent, and I like to think of it that way. And that was exactly, in line with what you're describing. There's a case in Germany where they did a very similar thing recently. Of course, it's in German, so I never actually shared it with you guys, but one of the AfD leader, she was being interviewed in a very serious interview on a mainstream television, and she's incredibly good at talking. She is pretty bright, and she comes across that way. She's very clever at manipulating the evidence, and they set up a choir behind her, all amplified, and they were singing in this choral tone. You had to listen out to hear the words. They were singing something a little bit, not abusive, but there were some swear words in there, so I'm not going to say what they were saying now. But they were basically saying the AfD are not a bunch of nonsense, right, with a number of German swear words. But they were doing it in this beautiful polyphonic choral form. So it was silly in a very German way. And at the same time as making a point. And you could hear it in the interview. It was so loud that the TV channel couldn't avoid recording it. So they streamed this whole choral music to the millions of people that were watching the interview. And I think it's also a similar example. But you do have to be careful, nevertheless, with this method of not overdoing it.
Yeah.
because then it
For
can
sure.
backlash. You become the silly one for saying, "Is that
Yeah.
all you
Oh,
Or
do?"
also,
yeah.
I was gonna go even say, when Kafka was saying it, like I agree what you're saying. Like the backlash could be that people start thinking you're the silly one. But also another like possible back way that that strategy could backfire is that suddenly people aren't taking the other person seriously, and so they don't take their
Well,
threats of how they could actually harm people seriously. Which I
right.
don't think is happening, but you know what
Yeah,
I'm
but
saying.
and, your strategies, you have to employ them correctly. Like the reason why I think
Correct.
it's working really great right now is that currently the silly stuff is coming from just people on the street, right? If Gavin Newsom going on Twitter and kind of being silly there, that works, right? But like, I don't want him to show up on a debate stage in an inflatable T-Rex costume. That's not what I'm asking for, right? But it's like it's again, it's you're really trying to juxtapose. You're really trying to show like just how extreme because the problem is that it's really easy to say, hey, look, this guy is this Hispanic guy. Obviously, he's illegal. Obviously, we need to get him off the street. He's violent. He's dangerous, right? If you see a guy in a silly costume and they're saying that, it's like, like it just there's just a natural resistance that calls for more evidence. Like it's harder for people to just like settle and go like, you know what, I don't know, but I guess maybe. So I'm just like I'm talking about people that are like willing to just tacitly allow things to happen, right? They look at that and go like, okay, what the fuck is happening? At the very least, they're gonna look more into it, you know.
Sorry to interrupt, Kafka.
Am I?
I know you guys can see my shared screen, right? Um, this guy's just been alive this whole time? Wait, what
Oh
the
yeah, I've been messaging him. Does he
Yeah,
think
we
it's at?
fucking
Do you think does he think it's at 1 Central Standard Time?
I imagine we've messed up a bit with it. I'm pretty flexible, and he only wanted a debate for 2 hours, so I think it's going to be comfortable. It's good for me because I haven't spoken to anybody. I've been doing home office all day, so I needed to talk to get the
Yeah, I
vocal
mean, I've
cords
been
working.
doing
So,
emails in the background, so nothing too bad for me. Just
I
but
mean, yeah, like this is fine. Like
okay.
I'm liking the combo, but
I mean,
Can
there's
I offer
there's
a counterpoint
Zip, go in his
to?
chat and tell him.
Can I offer a counterpoint to the
Sure.
memeing strategy? So I think the reason they are trying this now, like Newsom and the others, is because during the first term, like throwing out about, oh, this is the worst thing he's done yet. They did it like 100 times, and then no one gave a fuck, or at least there wasn't a result. And now they think, oh, trying to be serious didn't work, so we need to try to be to like laugh at them. But I think this is like a losing game because uh, they thrive in the unserious environment, whereas people who actually want to govern need like a level of seriousness to operate, and it just plays into their hand to lower the environment into the unserious. And I think that if the Dems actually they tried to be serious, but they didn't actually do it correctly, the serious response to Trump would have actually been to actually try him for his crimes and to try
yeah.
all of the sycophants for their crimes in the Biden term, and not like continue business as usual and just communicate, oh, this was so serious, this was so bad, but not actually do any consequences for them.
Sure.
I mean,
That's it.
we
It's just
ended up in this
okay.
situation because of those mistakes that you've just highlighted, and that's also why I say about moderation that the efficacy of these actions will be lost if it's done repeatedly anyway, and you can only really do it when they're in power. But there is also the argument, and looking forward and learning from the past about what to do, hopefully, if and when the Dems get power again, and being too. I've got other examples. I mean, there was also. For example, they wanted Merrick Garland in the Supreme Court, right? And then that was postponed by the Republicans right at the end of the Democrat rule, if I'm not correct in saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2016.
Yeah, and they never reciprocated with this. Like when because we ended up with what's her name, Amy Coney Barrett in
Yeah.
2020. They could have done the same thing. They could have reciprocated, and they didn't. So when they were in power, they weren't harsh enough in terms of saying, okay, well, you do this. I mean, I suggested that they could long-term reciprocal stand. They could have stated at that point, forget it in the future. You know, you try doing this in the future, we're going to reciprocate. And that's exactly what they could have done with Amy, and they didn't bother doing that. So there's a lot of mistakes made in power, and not trying Trump and not treating him as an absolute threat to the US like they should have done. I think you're spot on. We shouldn't have even got to this situation where we need the memes. But now we're in this situation, in moderation, I think is a positive thing.
Do we all agree that if the Dems win in 2028, they should like go criminally against like all the scams, all the like insider trading, all the backroom deals with public funds, etc.?
I would be against it. I just don't think it's the priority.
Don't you think it should be a priority?
No, I think fixing our government and the way that we operate and the rules there, I think is far more important. Like right now, like if we go after them, I mean, okay, but then they can just do everything again, get back in power, pardon everything we do, and undo it all. How about we make a system where they're not able to do that, and then we go after them?
But should they be?
Let's get DC a state. Let's make Puerto Rico a state. Let's fix the Supreme Court. Let's do all that. Great. Now the system's fixed. Great. Let's go after those guys so they can actually be held accountable. And then the system can't be undone in a way so that they can all get off. Otherwise, like, what? I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know why we would say this system is broken and it's not working. Well, let's get back in power and then use it again to try to hold them accountable. Well, why don't we fix the system? I mean, we can do two things at once, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Yes,
like,
exactly.
To me, the priority is fixing
sure.
the system.
I think you need both.
But don't you fix the system by rooting out the corruption?
I think it has to be
Like-
both. Yeah.
Well, if we have power, that's enough to fix the system. I don't know why I need to go
Yeah.
after Donald Trump criminally to fix the system. I don't know what that does to fix my.
Yeah, but the thing
Because-
is, if they get back into power again later, right? I mean, they can effectively just deny the existence of the system. They're almost doing that already, right? So
Yes, that's why we're
that's always
fixing,
an issue.
that's part of the fixing the system so that those people can get back to power.
Sure.
Make DC
Sure,
a
but
state.
then I
Make
think
Puerto Rico a state. Make it so that there's more proportional representation in Congress. Make it so that voting rights are more protected. Make it so that gerrymandering is harder to do and they can't do it the way they've been doing. These are all things that are fixing the system that have nothing to do with prosecuting people. So like, I don't know why I need to prosecute people to do those things. And if it's going to cost me political will to go prosecute those people and I have to give up any of those things I just described, I don't want to do it. I want to do those.
Okay,
things.
in that case,
don't
I
you-
get what you mean for sure, 100%.
Yeah.
But I think
But
like
don't you-
if you're fixing things so that this can't happen again, it would necessitate like the last thing was wrong. Therefore, to reinforce the fact that you do actually believe the last thing was wrong, I think those people need to also prioritize making sure those people
Right,
face
but
consequences for what they did.
The way you say that
Okay.
last thing was wrong was by electing a government that fixes it. I agree with you that prosecuting those people reinforces that,
Sure.
but the decisions no longer exist in court. Court is not what makes these decisions. The elections right now are all that matters. You make your decisions based on the elections. When the elections happen where we can fix the system, great. Guess what? These crimes, we all know about them. The evidence exists. We can come back later and get them.
Well, actually,
that's what they thought before.
I'll make a different argument then. Actually, in that case, elections happen, right? Elections will be for your legislative and your executive. Different people can focus on different things. The legislature focus on fixing the system, making new laws. The executive can go after these people for crimes, and
Sure,
whatever
yeah.
is appointing the attorney general, and then that.
If there is no political, if there's no like political capital we need to spend to do that, that would impact the things that the legislature needs to change. That's fine. I wouldn't like. I'm not
Yeah.
going to fight it. It's just it's
Yeah,
something
yeah.
where
I
it's like
disagree.
if I had to pick one, it's sure as fuck not going to be.
Yeah, if you pick one, for sure, I agree with you actually.
Yeah.
But I think
Okay,
it's
but
not
like-
simple. But yeah, I think
In,
it is.
after World War II, shouldn't do you think they had to spend capital to try like the war criminals and the Nazis and the
No,
Japanese?
no, there was no political capital expended to do that. There was universal hatred of those people. There was not 51% of the there was not 50% of the European population going, actually, maybe we should cut these guys a break.
Actually,
Right now in America, we're all
okay,
dealing with
this is a bit of a
politics.
tangent, but Kathy, you're kind of wrong in one way.
Yeah.
Especially
Okay.
in the European context with the prosecutions of the Nazis, right? In Germany and Austria and Italy, the people that supported them, they didn't just change their minds, they just went quiet. But they were simmering. And they caused a lot of the far-right nutters that we have today, was because they just never went away. They just had not only their own children, but they also passed on these messages clandestinely. And there were also supporters of Nazis in Belgium, for example. I think it was 40,000 Flems ended up either supporting or working with the Nazis in a tiny country. Of course, in France, you had people that welcomed Hitler, and they afterwards will have. I kind of thought it was next week. I think he might jump
He
on.
thought it was next week.
Anyway, so
the reason.
there was collateral. They did cost collateral. That's my sum up my point.
I understand. I understand what you're saying there in that sense of like that. I just mean in the sense the people that ran those trials did not have to suffer any political capital. The people that ran those trials were the Allied powers. They were not Germany or Italy or any of that. It was Great Britain, France, Soviet Union, and America. And then maybe there was a little bit in France, and there were certainly Nazi sympathizers and all those. But guess what? All of those people that did those trials, like, I'm sorry, it's not like it was like, well, if we do this, fuck, we can't actually rebuild parts of Europe. We can't actually build these alliances to help protect the future. No, they were like, this is fine. Just fucking.
Again, I disagree. I disagree. Okay. Because after the First World War, that was part of the problem, is that they didn't pay attention to the pulse of opinions in Germany. So there was a real risk by running the Nuremberg trials that they were going to lose the Germans again and push them again towards an extreme.
I mean, I guess I don't know. Like, to me, like, I guess I hear you on that, but in my mind, I don't. The issue is that you're talking about a defeated power versus like essentially trying to avoid a civil war. Here, it's like we've already won, and if the Germans go extreme again, we already have all of our military here. We already control everything. If the Germans get angry, I don't like. I hear what you're saying, and fair enough. There is a political question there that I'm not giving enough deference. I'm just saying I don't think it's relatable in a way to what we're talking about. Where like,
that's
if
true.
the Democrats are in power, the issue is that the Democrats are in power. They need to fix that system because there is a real chance that the Republicans could come in and change everything back and fuck them again. I do not think that chance existed in Germany at the time of the Nuremberg trials. It did not. We would have killed all of the Germans before we let that happen.
I disagree that it's a bit incomparable, but I disagree that it was so clear cut in Europe as to how it was done. But on the other hand, it's still quite different. It's still quite a different system. So I'll give you that you can't just say, well, they expended political capital. Why can't the Dems when they're in power again? But I would say this, that it doesn't really matter what the system is, especially in a country. I mean, I'm guessing the US isn't going to have proportional representation, and that would lead to a lot of changes. But if you're not going to have that, and I understand why you wouldn't have that, then you've got effectively a two-party system. And if you have a two-party system, the health of the system is contingent on both of those parties being reasonable and well-intended parties. And the main problem with the Republicans, right, is they're disingenuous. They're not interested in the health of America. Yeah. They're interested in their own pockets. They're interested in their own power for the sake of power and nothing else. They'll dress it up in any way they want to, but it's putting lipstick on a pig. And the only way to sort this out is by sorting out the Republican Party itself. And the way you do that is partly to do with these strategies, that you make it too costly for them to continue as they do, and they go back to the people. I would love to see an America where Connor was a Republican, right? And we could and Americans could debate the real meaningful stuff that's affecting them. I find it tragic and sad that you don't have this kind of system. And the only way is by making a Republican Party that would accept someone like Connor, because he should be there, right? He should feel home in the Republicans. He's been pushed out by these extremists, so if you don't fix that, you can't really fix the system in its entirety if you don't fix it. And the only way to do that is by really going hard on the Republicans in power in a fair way and making it clear that it's fair, making it clear that there's legitimate crimes that have already been committed, right? But I think it should be the priority. If it's either or, I would go after that.
I understand your position. I do not agree. I do not agree with this position at all. Okay, here's the deal. If we go like this is on Destiny too. I disagree. I think Destiny has a very bad take that he's been putting out there that really does not contribute very well to the conversation about this. Destiny has come out at many times, and I understand why he's saying it, and he's not entirely wrong in it. It creates a bad understanding of how this process needs to work and change. He's like, well, the Republicans control the whole government. They have all the votes. They can do whatever they want. He is right. In the current situation, that is true. However, this is an incredibly difficult position for a political party to get into. Now, the reason they were able to get here is from decades of destroying the system and making it so that they can have this kind of power, implement this kind of power, and then use it to their advantage. I'm saying we come in and we make a system where this strategy does not work. All right. You guys are like, well, they could all just lie to themselves, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no. If we make it where gerrymandering is no longer possible in the way that they do it, okay, they will have less seats in Congress. If we make it where there is DC and there is Puerto Rico as a state, they no longer have the same power in the Senate. If we make it where we change the rules on the Supreme Court, they can no longer hold power there as long as they do. And maybe there are ways around it in the future, and we need to be on the lookout and try to prevent those things. However, the issue is that let's say nobody gets prosecuted. Let's say everybody gets off and there's nobody that goes to jail for this, but we change the system anyway. Trump and the current Republicans would not be able to exert power in the way that they are right now because they would not be popular enough in the voters that they need. The districts that exist would no longer vote for them in the same way. So they could keep claiming all this shit, but they would never get more than 40% of the vote, and they would stay as a relegated minority power while the Democrats are staying in power. And that whole time they can bitch, moan, and complain and say how unfair everything is, but they don't have any power to do anything about it. So I don't give a shit if they're in jail or not in jail, because guess what? Everybody that's holding power and is in power and for the foreseeable future will have power is doing it in a way that I like. Now, at that point, 2 years after that, statute of limitation haven't run, go fucking start charging people. I don't care. But it's to me, the thing is, it's like, if we prosecute those people, guess what? Smarter, younger, better people than the people who are in power right now are watching, will use the same tactics and will succeed. It happens in every political system in which you have a gigantic amount of instability like this. Things go wrong, people right the ship, don't make any changes, and then like 20, 30 years later, someone shows up, does it the right way, quote unquote, and destroys everything for their own benefit. So I do not care about prosecuting them compared to fixing the system so that this cannot happen again.
I mean, I think you can appreciate, but I don't. None of these things to me appear black and white, and there's risk in both scenarios. Like if you had to really choose between these two strategies of basically restoring some kind of order to the American democratic system, because there isn't any order right now, then both have their risks. The risk in your case is what happens if Republicans win, because if they win and you're under the same culture, they're going to say, all that stuff is illegitimate. We don't care about Puerto Rico. It's not really a legitimate state. So we're going to ignore that anyway. And they would just call everything illegitimate and redefine the system in their form, right? So, I mean, in the end, the system's only as good as the people that recognize it.
If that happens, then they are correct. To be clear, if we do all of that and the American people still say we want that, then you know what? The Republicans are basically correct. Because the American people are saying, yes, we understand that you tried to fix the system and all that. We actually don't give a shit. We want Republicans in power to do this stuff. And at that point, welcome to democracy. That's how it goes. What I'm saying is, there is a huge aspect of this, and I agree with you that prosecuting them is a huge part of it. Prosecuting them is important as part of an education to the American people of why these things are wrong and why the change needs to happen.
So deterrence.
I agree.
So deterrence.
Well, yes. But I think that the prosecution serves the fixing of the system. The fixing of the system does not serve the prosecution. The prosecution should be done so people understand what was wrong and say, wow, that sucks. We shouldn't vote for those people, and we should support this new system that prevents those people from coming back. I agree with that. That is a great argument for why we should prosecute those people. However, again, I want us to have that system as our priority to fix, to get done, because that way, if the prosecutions don't happen, at the very least, the people that right now are in power are not going to get back in power in their lives. It's going to take the next couple generations before people can figure out how to undo the positive changes made to get back into power. And hopefully, dear God, we can get some people that have the foresight to preempt some of that and try to prevent it. Right?
Can I cut in?
Yeah.
So do you think like there's any analog with this to like after the Civil War and Reformation? I'm not so familiar with the history there, but maybe you are. Didn't they try to like reform the system, but didn't actually enforce many of those reforms?
Yeah.
So in the end, the system got perpetuated. The old one got perpetuated, and you got the negative future. So I think the prosecutions and stuff like that aren't in spite of changing the system, but they are required, absolutely required, to actually change the system, because without enforcement, you just leave like a paper system that no one follows.
Well, one second. If we never prosecuted them, but Democrats were able to win for the next 60 years, and maintain
You're
the
not
next
going to
60
win.
years. No. This is a hypothetical. If that
Okay.
happens, okay, and that, like, what I'm saying is like, in that scenario, I'm like, great, that I'm fine with that. If the scenario is we prosecute all of the Republicans, but we don't change our current system for the next 60 years, I would consider that a failure, right? That's kind of where I'm coming from. Is like, it's just like I
I
do
think
not
we all
want to
agree
start,
that like
yeah.
Okay, but
I think
can't
where the
I
disconnect is
say
like you would be fine, Kafka, if only the change in system happening. I think Recent Riffs and DRT, and like I put in a little bit of input or a little earlier, like I think that it's also like just as important, or that it would serve for not, or like even if you're right that like the system would exist and those people would be not allowed in power, that it would still be necessary to at the very least to show, as in like even just to make an example of, as like of those people, that would be necessary to show that you really do mean it, and that it really does matter, or stuff like that. But
I think Kafka
It's
is
just I just don't.
presupposing. Sorry, I think you're
No, go ahead.
presupposing that if you change the system, you're going to win for 60 years. Like, I think if you I think if you say that, if that's your hypothetical, of course I can't argue about this, but I can give you the same hypothetical. If you prosecute Trump and everyone else and you win for 60 years, are you against this strategy if you're going to win for 60 years with that?
Yes, I would. I would say I just said
Yeah,
that. I would say that is. I would
okay,
say I would not. I would not support that strategy because it does not fix the problems at the root of our system, and it allows 60 years from now for it to happen again. And I do not want it to happen again in the same way that it did now. I do not
But
think
I
that
can say
that
the
is a
same thing
temporary
about
piece.
yours. I can say about the same your hypothetical. Okay, we had the system for 60 years. We won like for 60 years, but because we didn't give an example of how you enforce the system in 60 years, the bad guys will just roll over again, and no one will be the wiser.
Yeah, but you know what? I would say that the difference there is that I would prefer a system in which has progress, tries to actually improve and fix the problems that we have. And if the people down the line cannot maintain that, it is on them to do it. And if we say, "Oh, we're going to prosecute them," and then like whatever, it's us. It's the Civil War again. It's just saying, "Oh, we just fixed our problems right now, and after that, whatever. I hope someone else can fix the problems that we have clearly identified, clearly understand our problem." But we're saying, you know what? Actually, even though it sucked and we, almost everything went to shit, we got these guys, and if it just works out for the next 60 years, we'll be okay. And you know why I don't like that and why I don't want that? Because the Democrats held the Congress for like so much of the 20th century. We held the Congress from, like, you can go look at it. We held it for like, I don't even remember, it was like 60 or 70 years. There was just like an overwhelming dominance of the Democrats in Congress. They could have made so many updates and changes and things that would have made this country resilient to what we're going through right now, and they did not do it. And I do not, and I do not want us to repeat that again. It has happened before. It should not happen again. We should have a culture of, we need to update our government. We need to make sure our government is working. That is what we need to do. If that means we have to let some people go that should go to jail, I will accept that. I don't want it to happen, but I would accept that. That is a fair compromise.
Okay, but there's a really good analogy here. There's a very clear analogy I just want to give here of this discussion, right? In terms of the 60 years of frankly negligence of making a more watertight system, which I entirely agree with. These are preventative measures, right? So it's like trying to prevent yourself from getting cancer. The problem is now that the body of the US democracy, it has a tumor, right? So there's no good now correcting the preventative measures while the tumor's still there. So you need both of those measures, right, to get a healthy democracy again. You need to find a way.
No judge will make a decision that gets the tumor out. You cannot do that. An election is what removes the tumor, not the judge.
Yeah, but
the judge is chemotherapy to make sure it doesn't come back. I'll grant you that. That's a great analogy.
Yes.
But it is not removing the cancer. I agree with all that.
Well, it's reducing its size. And
in this analogy, like you can't ever get rid of the cancer. It could still always come back.
Well,
in this analogy, right?
I guess that's
Unless
but
you,
okay. It's about keeping it in
well,
control.
hold on, wait,
right?
hold on. A judge
let's
could,
torture this. Let's torture
a judge
this way more.
could make the cancer go away and not come back ever.
If
A
he
particular
walked
cancer,
in,
but-
yeah, if a judge gets enough training time at a gun range, he could. But I mean,
don't encourage destiny.
I'd say that.
No, but more seriously, I mean, Kafka made also a really, really important point about the risk of going through the legal methodology. And that's you go after Trump, an old frail man who can't remember which room is which. And then there's these young guns out there that, you know, they're charismatic. And we've got them in all of our countries, by the way, sadly. These charismatic muggers, they do exist. And then it just leaves a void and a vacuum for them to inhabit. And that's a real risk. So I think in terms of all these, I mean, in the end, it's not. I think it should be a composite of the two strategies, right? And really cleverly honed, cleverly chosen corrections to the system. But at the same time, you are going to need to create a level of deterrence and take seriously. I really felt under the Biden presidency, one of his mistakes was that January 6th was not seen as, you know, a real insurrection against the US system. And it just wasn't treated with the seriousness. And I know why he did that. He tried to appear impartial, but it just didn't work, sadly. And we can see that now, right?
I'll extend an olive branch on this. I'll say this. I think that it would be unacceptable if the biggest players did not face charges. I would find that to be maybe not a total failure, but some level of failure. I think that my issue is that, and if I'm attributing this to y'all too much, tell me. But I feel like a lot of these discussions around holding people accountable, blah blah blah, is like we need to fucking get in there, all of them, just bring them all in. We're gonna just batch them all together and just right like.
That's a terrible idea.
Like, I know, but what I'm just saying is like it's this thing where it's like to me it's like I feel like there are definitely people that like should not escape justice, and if they did, it is a failure to some degree. And if we do have those kinds of failures, I would be disappointed. However, it's kind of a thing where it's like I don't want us to get caught. You know, I don't want us to get addicted and caught in this like sense of righteous vengeance when those crimes happened, the damage happened, and they are not going to be corrected in a courtroom. I think it is fine to use them as examples. I think it's fine to bring people in for justice when we can, but it's a thing that like, and then this is probably just my lawyer bias. A courtroom rarely ever will give you a satisfactory resolution. It is so difficult to get that in a courtroom in any setting. And so to me, I think there are externalities of these court cases, especially for very large figures, that need to happen. I agree with you. But as far as like we're asking so much from those court opinions, from the people observing them and wanting to be able to, and like hoping that they get what they need to out of them so that then the proper changes happen. Right. Whereas for me, it's like, let's get the ones we can, but like, fuck me. If you know, like, to me, it's like, if we get Stephen Miller, if we get Donald Trump, if we get JD Vance, if we get Besant, great, that rocks. If Mitch McConnell dies without ever seeing the inside of jail, of courthouse, or of a jail, okay, fine, whatever, let him go. Like, right?
I think I think it might have been, I might have shortcutted it way back at the start by saying like, you know, legislature can do their job, the executive can do their job, but also I think I agree with you 100%. Like, don't like it doesn't have to be like everyone, but I think it depends also what you go with. Like, I would be fine if like what you just said, like Trump, Miller, whoever else, like Vance, Christy Noem might add to your list that I don't think you said, but like certain people, like as long as you go after them, like that's fine. If certain
of course, like we didn't
senators don't
prosecute
go,
all
like
the
that's
Nazis.
fine, whatever. But also, like not even like from the courtroom, like certain people should be impeached, which would also kind of goes against my argument of like the legislature should focus on doing things versus whatever. But like certain people should be like removed from government, and like certain federal people should be like fired, like people who are joining ICE because they're fucking whatever. Like those fuckers should just be like fired, like shit like that. I think it's a little bit over-indexed. Kafka. I think we're not going that extreme.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but there are people who are.
I think I read too much into it just because like I know how intoxicating vengeance is and dreaming about it and stuff like that, but like that is like that is a suicide into populism that we would do. It is something we cannot let happen.
Yeah, I agree.
Where we so hard push back in the other direction that we get caught up.
Yeah, because
prescriptions and stuff like that.
The obvious risk, and like what you're saying, like it's hard for a courtroom to be give you a satisfactory answer. The obvious risk, right, is that suddenly people start getting off, right? That you did arrest these people and they are put to trial and then they get off. That's the obvious risk. That's why, like, for me personally, like when I'm proposing, like, oh, let the executive start going after people, it's like make sure like you have like the right attorney general who knows what they're doing, and make sure whoever's being like make it fucking Jack Smith or whatever again, and like make sure that whoever they're pressing charges against is like these are airtight cases.
Well, no, but also to be clear, Dirt, you would agree with me that we should not make any charges against people currently in power or something like that if we take power back until we fix the Supreme Court. Otherwise, it will not matter, right?
Yeah,
you agree with
that's
me
it.
there.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, exactly.
yeah.
Probably. So I think it's kind of, it doesn't really, maybe the whole argument doesn't matter because Trump will pardon everyone before he goes. But I just want to, I don't know, do you have an opinion if like the problem with the Civil War, the Reformation, was the enforcement or the system after? Because
the biggest issue was that the federal government did not properly enforce it afterwards. There were things they wanted to do. They did not properly. They could have done better, but I mean, like the number one reason why the Reconstruction, like quote unquote, failed was because the federal government just did not enforce what it said it was going to.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, I think
there's a point.
Thing that I only to finish.
Sorry.
I think that's my only thing, that you need the enforcement, otherwise the system won't continue. You can set up a nice system, but if you don't enforce it, it just won't continue. So I agree with everything else, and of course it has to be selective, because even with Imperial Japan and with Nazi Germany, after the Allies had complete control, they didn't go after everyone. They just selectively took their targets. Even the Emperor of Japan wasn't deposed because they figured that it will be too much of a disruption. So of course I agree. I'm not looking for revenge. I'm looking for a way to stop the system from perpetuating itself, the bad system.
No, that's totally fair.
There's also a point there of forgiveness of people lower down the ranks during the World War II, and I think that's applicable here. And that dispels this notion of victimhood of some kind of witch hunt. So it's not just the people you go after, it's the people that you leave and say, okay, the past is the past now. But just going back to the American Civil War, and it's not a period of history I've really formally studied or read in huge depth. But from what I understand, that the Electoral College was set up after the Civil War and was biased towards southern states as a compromise towards the southern states. This is true, right?
Yes, to some degree.
So the system was never really that ideal to start with, and part of the problem we have now with who's being elected is because of this poor weighting towards the southern states. So that maybe we could learn from history here that instead of compromising in that regards with the system, not about who you go after, but the structural changes, which is what you're arguing for, that there needs to be no compromise on the systemic corrections.
Right. That might actually be a good way to phrase it. I think there should be no compromise in the systemic corrections. I could be okay with some compromise on the prosecutorial stuff. Not enough where the system wouldn't be properly enforced. However, to me, again, like it's like if McConnell gets off, if Marjorie Taylor Greene never goes to jail, okay, sure, whatever. Fucking, if we don't send Thomas and Alito to jail, that's fine. Get them the fuck off the bench, okay? Get them the fuck out of there. And then get the people that we can, make a huge fucking example out of them, right? Make a ton of shit to show how evil and bad they are, right? Get that great propaganda. But yeah, to me, if it was like, well, okay, we did all that, we got Donald Trump, so like, I don't know, let's give the other states something, or like, let's give the MAGA people something. Like, no, fuck them. Like, sorry, they are not interested in giving us anything.
Exactly on the system.
People starved to death to take away healthcare. So no, I'm sorry, no, I'm uninterested in giving them a bone.
Exactly. I think on that front there needs to be no compromise. But I would say, I mean, almost not contradicting my previous point, but just seeing the balance in terms of the judicial path here, that a lot of conflicts, when they're resolved, involve a hell of a lot of forgiveness. That's also a critical ingredient. And it's a bit like a conflict where you have multiple flanks, right? You have multiple fronts, and you need to coordinate in which front you push hardest. but also the limits of how hard you push on those fronts. And I think there are going to be multiple fronts to correct the system, but you have to be careful from not pushing on. Some fronts need to be limited in terms of how hard you push and what methods you use when you push. So I think there needs to be a lot of forgiveness as well for the lower ranks, for MAGA supporters.
I mean, obviously as a Christian, I'm very big on forgiveness. I totally agree. There needs to be grace and victory, all that stuff. However, forgiveness is not the same thing as meaning that everything goes back to a status quo.
No, for sure not.
Understand that.
For sure not, yeah.
Okay. One of the problems in the Civil War that happened was after the Civil War, okay, we have all these fucking traitors in our country, okay? And guess what? They're here, they're going to stay, whatever. We're not going to kill them. They can keep living here, that's fine. But what we don't need is for Congress to come in and pass a fucking bill that says, you know what? We're just going to make it where all these traitors, it's fine. They can hold public office. They can do things. It's okay. We're not going to actually take away their ability to participate in government. Fuck that. If you're a traitor, if you did things that are going to destroy this country, that undermine this country, things like that, you don't get to participate in that way. Mm-hmm. Sorry, but not sorry. All right. We will forgive you. And by forgive you, that means that we're not going to, make you take a long walk off a short pier. But guess what? That means that you have lost the public trust. You're not allowed anywhere near positions of power anymore. Okay,
it's like that's the balance. Yeah. That's a bit of, for the higher ranks. That's the kind of balance you'd expect. Possibly with them admitting to.
I'm sorry. Anybody that is part of this administration officially as a political figure, if they were a part of the MAGA administration, it should not be forgotten, and it should be held against them severely, whether legally or socially. It should be held against them severely. Every single Republican that did not sign to let the Epstein files get released should suffer for that. All right, they should not be able to be a political figure after that vote. It is unacceptable that happened. Okay, and so that is the kind of thing where I will forgive them in the sense that, yeah, sure, you get to keep being an American. I will not forgive them in the sense that we should not make overtures to be like, I guess we got to reach across the aisle with these guys. Fuck that. Those people don't deserve us to reach out to them.
That's actually a good. That's a good segue to another question I had, which is, what happens if the Dems get back in, but they barely hold the House of Representatives, or not at all? That can happen, right? And the Senate is like on a knife edge, and they don't really have, the kind of power that they really need to exert these changes. I mean, it's almost stalemate, right? And that could.
If that happens, then God help us.
Yeah.
I mean, we get back to a situation of like, okay, like we are at a point where honestly, the Democrats need to start questioning their platform. If all of this can happen and it's still on a knife edge, then guess what? The Democrats need to start jettisoning parts of their platform that do not have anything to do with us taking power and reforming the system in a better way. Like at this point, it's like, yes, guess what? The Democratic Party will no longer be the Democratic Party that you know. Sorry, all of this progressive shit, apparently it is truly toxic, because if we continue with this, the other side is going to continue to win. And right now, I'm sorry, is not the time to fight for it.
There's a Republican elephant in this room, and that's Fox and the right-wing media in America, which makes it incredibly difficult to control the narrative, to how your rhetoric is framed. I mean, there's this huge bias against Democrats to start off with because of that. And now you have Twitter, which is effectively, Fox Part 2, in terms of the effect.
I'm about to tell you how to fix that problem.
Okay, so, I'd love to hear it. Okay.
It's great. Here's this thing, okay? There is the freedom of the press, right? Guess what? We write an amendment to the Constitution that says the press, all right? In some language, we say press is whenever you were just reporting facts on the ground. Mm-hmm. Anything after that is not the press. It is commercial speech. And in America, commercial speech is heavily regulated. And you know why it's commercial speech? It's because these fuckers are saying it to make goddamn money. So guess what? It's not that they're informing the public. They have an interest in making money, and we should hold them liable as though it's any other form of commercial speech. So guess what? Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a licensing system where if you want to be a newspaper, if you want to say the news, if you want to be a streamer that goes online and listens to JDAMs hit fucking Israel, you're going to go in and you're going to, guess what? Now those things are all liable. And yet then, because you have that license, now the public can come in and say, hey, that guy lied. That's all the standing I need. I'm going to sue him for fucking malpractice of news reporting. Okay. And those people now have to have insurance against that kind of malpractice. They have to be careful with what they say whenever they're doing editorializing. And then whenever Fox News goes off and pops off like that, it's not just Dominion showing up and making all this money. Everybody gets to show up. Everybody gets to go, actually, that was a fucking lie. That was a fucking lie. That was a fucking lie. And we make it too expensive to be lying pieces of shit on the news. That's what we do.
I mean,
liability solves that problem.
The media should fall under the education department, right? It's a form of education for adults. It should be taken that seriously. But the thing is,
I disagree. The media is a business. The news is facts on the ground.
Okay, I mean the news, but I mean
the press is. If you want to put that education, that's fine. You guys figure that out. But anything outside of facts on the ground is not any kind of education.
No. That's sorry, I misunderstood. Sorry, but I'm saying because there's a kind of this overlap, right? Which is a murky overlap, but in a sense, in itself, is some freedom of speech because then these corporate entities, right, that seek money in the name of destroying the US, can say, hey, but now we're having the freedom of our speech mitigated. And I mean, ideally, what you've just described would happen, but then there's also a question of discussing what a fact is. And of course, there's a reframing of facts to make them sound different to what they want to be.
Courts of law deal with that every single day. You have issues of fact, take it to court. Figure it out there. That's what literally we have courts for. I understand what you're saying. I don't disagree, but that's
I'm still minding your argument a bit. But I mean,
but to be clear, I'm not saying the government comes in and says what facts are. I'm saying the people would sue, individuals would sue a news organization, take them to court. The court would say, great, let's get a jury in here. You present each side. Is this a fact? Is it not a fact? What does this jury say? The jury goes, yeah, we don't think it's a fact. Fuck that. And they go, great. News organization, you got to pay this guy, right? Because I don't want the government to say what a fact is. I want the people to do it, and that's what the court's there for. Go ahead.
Okay, guys. Thanks for the talk. I'm gonna jump out.
Thanks for an out, JRT.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
See you, buddy.
I mean, I've still got time, so if you want to continue talking through this stuff, then I'm more than up for
fighting. This is our new E-Core episode for today.
I didn't realize we'd disagree so much, Kathy. It's great.
Reason riffs on do we execute all Republicans with the firing squad, or do we cuck out and just legislate? That's not the debate.
I mean, not that's a false dichotomy between our 2 points or anything, but
correct. That's why.
But
I mean. But no, I hear you. I hear you about the true issue of the American media, and that is part of the system.
Not just the American media. I say this because it's mimicked all around the Western world, where we actually, converse and try and come to some kind of reasonable position. I mean, of course, even in dictatorships, they have to care because of falling off roofs and stuff about public opinion to an extent, and you can see, of course, they still manipulate public opinion because it matters. But in democracies, of course, it's all that more important. And for that reason, it's been all that more of a focus in terms of entities who want lots of power and lots of money. And I don't think that's, that kind of bias towards trying to gain power and this right-wing trajectory of a lot of media in the West, because people with a lot of money want to fund those systems, because on average, they're going to want to keep their money, which is probably on average what all of us would do if we had that money. So it's not that I'm blaming these people. Is something that hasn't really been thought about in terms of a corrective measure in the system to keep facts and to keep information as unbiased as possible. And I just think that facts and information and arguments should be treated with the same value as education in schools. I think it's playing a very similar role in our society. It teaches people how to argue, how to reason. And if it's tainted to such a degree that you've got all the possible fallacies that you can imagine, all the possible objections that you'd see in a court, but there's no objection, there's no correction, and they're just allowed to use those fallacious ways of reasoning, you're teaching people fallacious ways of thinking, right? Like through arguments, through association, all this kind of stuff. And I just see it in all of our democracies. I think it's one of the biggest failures that is currently the case. And correcting that in theory is, as you describe it, in practice, I think it's going to be incredibly hard.
I want to be clear. I definitely agree with you there. Just like I know that I'm saying it in like these sound bites that can like be understood, but like there is so much that has to go into it, and it cannot just be. There is no turn the switch and now the fascism is gone. I agree with you.
And you know the
There's
Constitution
so
will be
many
used
layers.
against you. They're going to use freedom of speech against you all the way.
Yeah,
And there's
that's what I'm
huge
saying.
political collateral involved
Yeah.
in dealing
Oh
with that,
yeah.
right?
I agree, and it's that's why I'm saying like for me, that's where I would spend it.
Oh,
Those are
that's because
that foundation is where I
that's
spend it.
so that's the systemic kind of change that you. I mean, I agree. I
Right.
think it's a huge. It should be a massive goal.
Because here's the other thing that like, and this is something that like I hear this a lot from non-lawyers about the kind of holding people accountable thing. Like we have statutes of limitations for a reason, so that you don't have to rush into things, right? And like a lot of the times it's 2, 4, 6 more years that we have to go after these people. And the investigation that's going to go on is going to take long enough that it's going to happen years later anyways, right? Unless we're talking about some kind of Nuremberg trial thing. And so to me, it's like, it truly is a like, you're going to do both at the same time, no matter what, right? However, um, a lot of the time, same with this, like being careful of vengeance, rushing into court, trying to get there as soon as possible so we can convict him as soon as possible. I think there's a really strong argument for why you would do that with like Trump after the last term. I understand why you would want to do it as fast as possible, all those things. And I don't necessarily disagree with them. However, like, I don't think that we're going to have as clear of a shot for a lot of these guys necessarily, as far as like someone admitting on tape that they committed a crime, like the way Trump did in that case, where like that should have been acted on way sooner. Um, but like, yeah, to me, it's a thing where like it might just be my bias of like they're there. These people aren't going anywhere. Their crimes aren't going anywhere. If we are in power, if we can make it where we stay in power, we have all the time in the world to prosecute them. But I think that like I am sympathetic to the idea that like if we just let them languish and just sit there, that does send a message to a lot of people like, was it even that big of a deal? Like if
Yeah.
you guys aren't chasing him down, then why do I care?
I mean, here's a hot take. I don't. I think if it was just going after Trump in isolation, I don't know if that would be worth it. You need the people around him, because then the people around him, or people that want to be like the people around him, will think, well, we can get away with it so long as we're not
I
the
agree with
ones
that.
at the front. Because Trump is a bit of a useful idiot for those people, right? So I
Right.
think it's not all or nothing, and it's definitely not going after an awful lot of people who are guilty of damaging American democracy, because that's the forgiveness part lower down the ranks. But you do need to go after his closest circle, because it's those people that are the most dangerous. You know, they can find another Trump, but that involves a level of intelligence, and that's a warning to people with a level of intelligence and who are malicious. Don't screw around with this, you know. And it also then is a sign that American democracy still exists and still works by sending that message. So I think it's important the message is sent, but I think, you know, Trump is just a tip of a very nasty iceberg, right? And we don't go after the whole thing, that it's possibly then it's worth, if it really is not, you know, if you really don't get the power in the Senate and the House, and you really think it's not possible in terms of the evidence available that beyond reasonable doubt that they can prosecute those people, then they really do have to question whether it's worth it whatsoever, and then focus on systemic change. But it's a really a question of what is feasible with the power that you end up getting. But hopefully this change won't only just take place in the States; it will also take place in Europe. And at the moment, if you see the political discourse in the UK, I mean, I mainly read UK news, sometimes Dutch and sometimes German, more German than Dutch. Because I don't know if you know, I speak Dutch and German to a reasonable degree, but I'm more comfortable with English. And it's a catastrophic situation politically in the UK at the moment. And there's a lot of responsible parties. And again, I think this is another thing that is applicable in the US. You know, the Democrats, when I look through these lists of things I was going to bring up today, and if anyone's listening, by the way, I'm going to be debating Connor next week. We mixed up our dates.
It's happening.
And
Surely,
it will
this time
happen,
for real.
hopefully so, because well, the Thursdays for me is a little bit more difficult, but we'll find a way. But if I really looked through a lot of failures on the part of the Democrats that led to the conception of MAGA, and yeah, I see very similar things happening, for example, in the UK. And it's also this prosecution of people with direct financial links to Russia, and who have been compromised. It's evident and it could actually be prosecuted, and they don't bother with it. There's an article I wrote in the Pragmatic Papers about the links of neo-Nazis to Russia, and it goes back to the 80s and even earlier in some cases. But in the 80s, Putin himself was likely involved in forming those connections in West Germany and East Germany. So it's been going on for so long, and ignoring that's also the responsibility of the center-left in our countries. In the meantime, in the UK, you have a situation where we have a Labour government with a massive majority. They can do an awful lot. They're generally doing a lot of the wrong things, but part of the problem is that the UK's got a fiscal problem left by the Conservatives, to be fair to them. But no one else is being fair to them on that front. But then what they are doing isn't probably the right priority. In the meantime, Starmer, before he was elected, had gone complete Stalin in the party and purged of anything that didn't follow within his view. So you had Jeremy Corbyn, the previous leader, who had basically overlooked anti-Semitism, and that was one of the reasons, as well as losing an election, was ousted as leader, or he resigned, probably was pushed a little bit. I completely agree with that. But then he was ousted from the party because he refused to say that anti-Semitism was a massive problem in the Labour Party. And it isn't a massive problem, but any anti-Semitism is bad. But he said this, and he lost party membership. And a lot of people have not lost their membership for a lot worse than this. So it was clearly ideological, because he's quite far left in the Labour Party, but he's loyal to the Labour Party. And his circle, most of them have remained in the Labour Party if they have been allowed, and continue to be loyal to the Labour Party. So they're not doing a Hassan here of saying, oh, they're all the same. They're not those types, right? They have some very, very left of socialist views, some of which I don't agree with, some of which I do. But nevertheless, they still toe the party line and effectively and stick to the Labour Party. And Starmer kicked all those people out. And now they're starting to form new parties. They're joining the Green Party. And now, if you look at polling, the Green Party in the UK is neck and neck with the Labour Party, right? And the reform is double both of them, right? This far right, the Marga of Marga, they're a really far right party. And so it doesn't really matter, it doesn't matter, but where we ever are in our own systems, it's also about where they're going, right? It's no good having, if we have power today, but we can clearly see we're going to lose it in 2 years, that's just as bad as not having it now, unless it's, there's still some ways around it. And that's kind of the situation the UK is in. So from the outside, it looks, well, they've got the Labour government. No, it's going in a very, very negative trajectory. And the media are also responsible for this. Including those influencers on Twitter, but also the right-wing media. And the BBC is just so flaccid, and they get accused of being on the left, which they'll do anyway, so they should actually just be more moderate and try and fight against those who have the UK's interest not at heart. But this, again, goes often back to the media, and the left being too weak when they have power.
I think, I think that's it. The one dangerous thing about this conversation that we're in is it's a little too hopeful that we are going to obviously get out on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And like, here's how, this is how I would do what I would do if I won. And I think that it can be a little scary to have those conversations because you don't want to hope and then be disappointed. But one of the reasons I like talking about them is because stuff you just brought up, where it's like, you have experiences, the history, political systems that I don't, and you can give me perspectives where it's like, I don't know if I'm necessarily changing my mind, but it's definitely like, okay, good. Yeah, like we need to have much understanding, as much planning ahead on this stuff, because what I don't want is for us to get in there, be flabbergasted that we even won, and then just kind of go like, whatever works.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
And I wouldn't be able to stand something like that. And not to show on Joe Biden too much, but there was a little bit of that in his administration where it's like, okay, like we just came out of the worst administration we've ever had. Like, what are we really going to do here to prevent that from happening again? It's like, well, we're just going to govern well, and it's like,
exactly.
Just say you think Merrick Garland's a cuck. Just say it.
Yeah,
I mean,
Biden is a cuck for putting Merrick Garland there. He should not.
I'll give you 3 lessons to learn from the UK system, right? Firstly, is they were clearly coming up to the election just going to win it with a massive majority. And yet they had the most stupid electoral promises, for example, not raising any income tax, right? Even though, and I was saying this before the election, that, well, this is really stupid. Labour won in 1997, stating they were going to increase income tax. And the fiscal situation in the UK is precarious. Debt does matter, not as much as some people might think, but in the UK situation, it's a really precarious situation. The state will need to raise some tax revenue. So they should never have made that promise. And they could see before the election that they were that they didn't need to make that promise. Maybe they were lost.
In our election, we should have Democrats should have ran on increasing income taxes?
No, I'm not talking about the previous election. I'm talking about 2028. Let's say that Trump does what the Tories party did, and they've just lost so much popularity. It's a good chance of a global recession. If it doesn't come too early, I mean, if it came now, it'd screw up the midterms, but it'd be better for it to come in a few years and really screw up the election proper, right? And let's say that happens, and you're really like steamrolling into power, and it's kind of evident, and even a stone could win the election, right? It's effectively what happened, right? Stammer's not the most charismatic man. So this is one of the mistakes, was before the election promise is way too harsh. He could have left himself with a bit of ambiguity and stated, I'm leaving that ambiguity because I want to be flexible in power. He could turn it into a strength. I don't understand why politicians don't do that. It's like admitting that they don't know everything. They're not omnipotent. The other thing was that they purged the Labour Party frankly, the far left, but also the far left, I say, they're not the Hassans, they're the ones who say, hey, I really support the Democrats. Like the previous election, like Walsh, right? So it's almost like a German word, so I pronounce it like a German word. He was saying, hey, I'm voting for Harris. She's not great, but I'm going to vote for Harris. He sometimes sways a bit, but when it comes to the election, he votes the right way, right? So he should be considered part of the club. And people should listen to him. If you disagree with his views, get him onto debates, get him to argue. Don't just shoot them.
Issue with that is
he doesn't debate.
People, it's with Vosh, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, in this case, right? But I'm just talking about people of his politic, right? And the Labour Party just shut them up completely and shut them off entirely. And my father is an acquaintance of Corbyn. I know he's a genuine man. He's not badly intended. He has been and continues to be a bit of a useful idiot sometimes for Russia, and I despise his politics for that. But he's not a badly intended person, and he was sticking by supporting the Labour Party. He should have been left as a member of the Labour Party. That's the main test. Will you vote for the chosen leader at the end, right? And then the other thing was just not preparing for power, right? And having a decent set of, and that's partly to do with the electoral promises. So it's kind of related to that point. But those three things, they're massive. And in the end, now we're looking at possibly getting some far right, absolute nutcasing, worse than anything like Sunak. Don't know about Liz Truss, but worse than Sunak and certainly worse than David Cameron. Was it worth having leadership, having Labour in for 4 years to have something even worse afterwards? And the same question must be asked. The 2028 election, there's a good chance the Dems can go into that with lots of momentum, with Trump really failing. Good chance that they have an opportunity to be really honest with the American electorate and say, this isn't going to be easy. We may have to actually raise some income taxes. Government spending needs to be maintained to a certain level because it maintains infrastructure and it maintains productivity and it's good for the economy. That's another aspect that left parties don't do enough, is they don't argue from the point of view of economics enough. There's too much vibe politics and caring for the fluffy bunny stuff, right? And all that kind of thing, which is important. But there's also economic arguments for that too. So frame it economically. The middle class listen to that stuff. They want the economic ship to stay afloat. They don't want that to sink, right? They listen and think in that language in terms of talking about maintaining a stable and healthy economy. So frame it in that way. But some of that will be about investment, and investment comes and state investment is very important. Look at infrastructure, look at the history, look at what Eisenhower did in the US history. It comes through tax revenue. And so tax shouldn't be a dirty word. And that's going to be difficult to frame. But if the Democrats are looking at that big majority, then they have that political collateral coming into that election to be honest with the electorate about that. And that's something difficult, but doable. So I really hope this lesson's learned from the UK situation. And practical. They can be implemented, right? What I've suggested, it's not airy fairy. It's really, something that can be done.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good point to go out on. I definitely like it. I have to get back to work because I've been hiding from my boss. So I'm
Yeah,
going to get
that's
back
fine.
to it.
I
I
gotta
got some
say,
things.
I know Reason was also gave us 2 hours for this, so I don't want to keep you
Yeah.
longer
Well,
than
well,
you
we
need.
kind of said. I mean, I mean, we should keep some powder dry for next week, and
For
Yeah.
sure.
yeah. So I mean, there's my slides are prepared and everything. I mean, I've got it ready for next week, I guess. So if anyone's been listening, Connor wasn't able to make today, but we're looking at having the debate
Yeah.
next week, and so we ended up just
It'll
having
happen.
spontaneous
Yes.
discussion.
Yeah.
Um,
Sorry to bait y'all, but yeah, no, I really got to get rolling. So great to talk to y'all. Love the
Yep.
discussion.
Thanks for
Have a
coming,
great weekend,
Kafka, as
everybody.
always.
Yeah, of course.
See you next time.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on, Zip Zip. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Wait, Kafka. Wait. Reason, stay after Kafka goes for a second.
Bye.
Yeah, I'll stay on. Yeah, cool.
All right, Reason. Real quick. Show for the pragmatic papers. Do it.
Oh,
Tell everyone to
that's
go
true.
along.
Okay, well, I mean, yeah, the last edition actually was one of the best I've seen. There was a really interesting article about the Chinese space projects and how they're not all just stuff on paper, that and they're not just copying and stealing American designs, and it's something that we should be wary of. There was also, I'm doing this off the top of my head, so forgive me, but there was also someone who.
Yeah, I ambushed you with that, but just
No, but
while you're here, might as well.
It's worth discussing, and there's the DDG Awards for political activism, and there's some really insanely hard work that I absolutely commend, because these people are standing up for our democracies and for real change. It's all easy enough to just sit back on Discord and chat about these things, but these people were out in the field doing the hard work, and they need to be recognized, and they were recognized. So I think that was really nice to see in the papers. So that was a good news story. Another good news story was my own article, which was on the far-right populist leadership being kicked out of power in the Netherlands, and whether there's any lessons that the US can learn and other democracies can learn from that about fighting populism. And I'll leave you to read that to see what the conclusion was. Looking forward, I'm writing an article partly based on looking at applications of game theory in politics, but also the looking at political psychology. So I'm just to clarify, I've got a degree in philosophy, and I've got a degree in physics and a master's in physics, and I'm doing a doctorate in the subject. But I have generally a broad range of interests. History was a big one, and still is. But I do try and read around other subjects. The borders between academia are quite arbitrary. So, but psychology, on the other hand, is a bit of my weakness. So I will try and read through this, and maybe I should talk to.
It'll come in a bit.
Yeah, but actually, in some respects, it can appear on the surface to contradict it. I mean, this is what I've kind of gone over today, that we do have to be careful about the psychology of feeding the psychology of victimhood of the populist side, because it feeds their narrative and actually can end up strengthening their narrative. So, I hope to write an article about that in Pragmatic Papers, and it's growing, and we're getting some excellent writers there. So it's always worth a read.
I was gonna say, I mentioned to Kafka a few months ago that I was considering writing an article. After I had read Kamala Harris's book, 107 Days, I was like, oh, I'll write an article about it, because I was taking notes as I was reading and shit. I've still got my notes, but I never got to writing the article. But I said it a few weeks ago that I would, but after next week, the 20th, Kamala is coming to Miami for her book tour, and I'm going. So I was like, oh, I'll write the article after that, and I'll have it be about the book, plus about the book tour, plus I don't know, whatever else I want to talk about Kamala in general.
Yeah, she's a really interesting character.
Basically, I think Kamala has a good chance in 2028. I think she's going to run for the nomination in 2028.
Oh, really? Really? And you think that's...
Some polls came out a few days ago that people were like putting on Twitter and shit. Currently, she's leading in like very way off polls, but like people were polling. I think she had like 21%, 28%, and like she's leading compared to like Newsom and AOC and Buttigieg and whoever the fuck else they put on there, right?
Oh wow, that's interesting. I never would have thought. Okay.
Yeah. And how it makes there were like some analyses of like she's winning with particular coalitions that really matter. Like Black voters really went for Kamala, which does actually matter a lot for our stuff. Like Joe Biden got the nomination because of Black voters. I think shit like that. And also name recognition. Plus, she already ran a campaign. Plus, you know, all the other reasons that people should have voted for her last time. She can rerun on the same shit and like yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing is she also lost a campaign, so that's tricky,
There's
right?
that. But then I would then, and I think she made a case sort of in her book, and like she doesn't like throw the blame exactly. Like she still says like it's on her like for the campaign. Like she could have done these things differently. Like she talks very candidly in the book about the mistakes she made and what things she could have done differently. But I think overall the impression I get from the book, and I think is pretty reasonable to believe, is that like the biggest failure of her campaign was simply that it was too short. She only had 107 days, and that was the biggest reason she lost. I'm kind of on that train a bit, and so I think if she had like a whole election cycle to campaign, she could win.
Okay, I mean, we effectively agree on that, right? That
Yeah.
I mean, she actually I think was a decent candidate who just wasn't given the time, but nevertheless, just in terms of association, she is associated with losing that election. Do you not think that's a little bit risky? I mean, the polling suggests otherwise.
I think
right?
it absolutely would play against her. But then, like you're saying, yeah, the polling, and then just making that case to the American people by saying like, yeah, we lost, but I would then go to like her speech after the election where she was like conceding. She said like, because one of her slogans throughout the campaign was like, when we fight, we win. Like she writes in her book about like how they had to like thread that needle where okay, but we lost though, right? And her thing there, like the way that they did it, and like she's been on this since, was like the fight's not over. So like even if we are sit back, we're still gonna win in the end. And I think there's a way to like kind of leverage that kind of message, like we lost once, but that's okay. We can win, and we're gonna. And also, I think she also has an advantage where she can literally run on. I told you guys this would happen, and now it's happening. Yeah,
I mean,
it's a lot of different things that are kind of been floating in my head about. But I do think she has a really good chance. Like if I were to bet, I would put a fuck ton of money on Kamala.
Really?
If I
Okay.
had to bet on one person over anybody else.
But on a personal level, or on just looking at their politics, not who has the best chance of winning, which potential candidate fits you the best? Like of AOC.
So that's the other thing, right? Like, right now, like the only real like contender, right, that is like putting themselves out there for like they're definitely gonna run is Gavin Newsom. I'm not sure. I'd have to look more into like, personal politics, like what exactly are their disagreements politically and stuff, to know. And that's sort of thing that would come out in the primary. So like I'm not like saying right now in the primary I'm gonna vote for Kamala. It would depend on what happens there and like what distinctions people make.
Do you not think it's a bit the other way around that during a primary, I mean, people dress up their politics, and so it's a little harder to see it. But the best time to look at their politics is when they're not actually running, and then you get a more honest view of their positions. I feel like in these.
I think you're right, in many ways, but also I think that it doesn't mean like the primaries are like useless, right? Like it's still like if people are saying certain things in primaries, they kind of have to follow through, or else they are like told that they're you didn't follow through or whatever. And like that kind of happens. Like people will say like, oh, Biden promised like 15-hour minimum wage, and it's like, well, he tried. Like he didn't get it, but that wasn't on him. It was because Manchin Cinema wouldn't do it. Like shit like that, right? Like politicians will try shit that they campaigned on. And I do think that kind of follows. So I agree with what you're saying though. Like I would have to look at their history now, but I really like Kamala's record generally. So I would lean towards Kamala, just because I haven't looked into Gavin Newsom as much, and I don't know how true all the he's bad in California and he's whatever and shit like that is.
I mean, Harris seems like a very intelligent lady, and the way they tried to frame her, I can't remember what she was talking about, coconut trees or something. And it was just one analogy. And if you looked in the broader context of what she was saying, it was pretty, reasonable.
The coconut thing.
Yeah, I forgot. I just remember exactly.
Yeah,
we just call it the coconut.
Of a coconut tree. Yeah, no, her like that's a good. It's like a funny meme, but like people will talk about Kamala like, oh, word salad, like, oh, or like she's too rehearsed or like whatever. But like, you can just look at what she says.
But
She
it
makes perfect sense. Like, yeah.
in the broader context, but you have to be careful that things are going to be taken out of context. And
Yeah,
I forgot what our
for sure.
Bulgarian friend's name is, but he made a good point about this, that leaders need to be seen as fairly serious. There's one thing about having memes when you're out of power and it's not coming from you directly, and it's, you know, from the base.
That's like the big thing I think with Kamala that kind of was happening at the time of the elections. Like, there's so many competing narratives about why Kamala lost. Like, you'll have at the same time people going, "Oh, she was too serious. Oh, whatever. Like, she's too rehearsed." Shit like that. While also getting the she laughs too much and she uh is silly because of the coconut thing and like, oh, this, and I don't know. I I mean, like, you're right. Like, the perceptions matter, but also I think a lot of it is kind of manufactured in a way. And
Well,
like
it is, but
just from reading the book, like she talks about specifically about some particular like manufactured shit that people just made up about her, and it's like, yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. People just made shit up about you, and that really affected the way people perceived her.
I mean, there's the manufactured stuff that's just randomly produced, and then there's the vulnerabilities you have that
Yeah.
allow, you know, kind of an exaggeration of something. And those are two slightly different things. Of course, you want to mitigate the last one because you can actually control that depending on who your candidate is. But the first one, I mean, there's nothing you can do about that, right? And I think Harris was guilty. He experienced a lot of the first case. They just tried to look for anything. And I thought she was very. I felt that her campaign went through phases. The initial phase was the best, and I got the impression she was getting less advice and just spoke more from the heart. And then later on, she seemed more hesitant, like she was being told almost what would be best to say, and didn't seem
Sure.
quite as from, you know, speaking from the heart so much. But in either case, she didn't bring up much that she was a woman. And
Yep.
even though okay, it's nice if you have a female president, it's not. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter really in a way. Whereas
Yeah, I
if you
think
compare
she
that
talks in her
to
book about that. Like, Trump immediately tried to make it, like he said, I forget exactly what it was, but like very close to near the beginning of the book. For instance, the book starts like it's like each chapter is just this day, and it'll be like, you know, it was through with 107 days. It's not every single day, but it's kind of laid out like that. It's very near the beginning, close to the start of her campaign. Is like Trump said this about you being black, or like I think it was that Trump like accused/joked of like, you know, what he'll do, right? That she wasn't actually black or something. And then she had like an advisor telling her like, oh, you need to respond. You need to be like, I am black, and this is your history, and like you grew up in a black community and shit like that. And she said, why the fuck would I do that? That's not what my campaign's about. I'm not gonna make it about my race.
exactly,
Right?
I
So
trust
it was very, yeah.
that's exactly the thing. I felt that. I mean, this was, you know, I mean, speculative, but I got the impression I trusted her far more than the people advising her. And I found that a bit of a shame.
Maybe, yeah.
And often, I mean, not many politicians that you can say that about. You can understand that they're, you know, a little hesitant on their feet, and then have some really clever advisors around them that kind of keep them propped up. But in her case, I was quite impressed by how she came out, and then the polls went up were quite in her favor in the first few weeks of her being, you know, given the candidacy, and you know there was real hope,
Well,
right?
she earned the candidacy by getting all the delegates she needed in the DNC as is needed. But yes, continue. I understand your meaning.
Yeah,
But just
I mean, the thing is, she was definitely no Hillary Clinton. That was a disaster in the making. And so I mean, both
yeah, I
of
think
them
she's
lost.
a way
but-
better candidate than
Yeah,
Hillary.
I mean, I think she is a good candidate. I just worry about that. Yeah, that history of losing an election. I think the way you framed it is quite a nice one. Like we lost the battle, but we didn't lose the war. Kind of way of talking about it. And of course, you have to be careful about how combative, given that you're dealing with these crazy far right nutcases.
So I'll just wanted to respond to the other thing you had to say, which was like it seemed like at the beginning she was like kind of less rehearsed, and then afterwards like her advisors were making her say certain things. There's a little bit of that in the book, not exactly in the way that it seems like your theory is that like, you know, people were controlling her or whatever, but
not controlling, but there was people
certainly
talking
it's like
to her.
yeah. I know what you mean, but like in the book it's like generally on that particular point, and I can't remember particulars, but it seems like really what was happening was a lot of the limitations on that sort of sense was that they were being really careful. Her campaign and slash her were just like everybody just wanted to be really careful, and so they didn't take as many risks.
Yeah,
as
exactly. But that's the
maybe
impression I
should
got.
have, because
Yeah, but that is a risk in itself, right? Because you can see
Mhm.
it, you can feel it when someone generally speaks from the heart, and they're not thinking about a bunch of bullet points. It's like when I prepped for this debate today, right? I mean, I have a lot of bullet points, but I know that you should be a little bit careful about just trying to ream them off. And sometimes, you know, if you've got a good tangent, you follow that tangent. And she has some really good
Yeah.
tangents when she was speaking initially, and I felt like those
Yeah.
were not followed up later on because, you know, she was listening because she was trying to be too
And you
careful
can,
and such like.
I
So
think you can kind of see that, like, in her debate versus Trump, like when she's just like, she had like bullet points, and she talks a lot about her debate prep and, like, the specific points she wanted to say. But like, I felt the debate, like, she came off really like personable, like,
yeah, it was a brilliant
there were
debate.
particular
Yeah.
moments where she's like, she kind of like kind of confirms in the book that the theory that people had that she was about to call Trump this president, like, that she was about to say this motherfucker or whatever. But like, yeah, there's like I think her debate performance was really good, and that kind of like is like her when it's like not a speech, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely agree with what you're saying, but I think that could be remedied by just like having more time and being more willing to take a risk and, like, be more like, stake out your positions way more.
Exactly. I think that is actually less of a risk overall. I also think another part, failure of the strategy. Now, there's many theories as to why it didn't happen, but that she didn't end up on the Joe Rogan podcast, and just generally on a lot of podcasts and getting deep into, away from legacy media. I don't know why that didn't happen, but if it was really Rogan's issue, not hers, then she should have vocalized, go, hey, bring me
Sure.
on. I want to go on. I will even go to wherever you want to have it. I'll even do it
So
with
on that, right? She talks about that in the book. So I think she brings up a couple things in the book, which is that she brings up, like, on this day I did this show, and like she'll talk about, I did this show with this podcast hosted by these former basketball players. She says about, I did this show, like, the one that people were talking about at the time, like there's some woman podcast or whatever. She did do a lot of shows, but she also talks about how she wishes she could have done more, but there simply wasn't the time. Now, I think she also talks about, like, maybe they should have devoted more time to that versus like in-person events with whatever, but like a lot of it is like there really wasn't time to, and then
there should have been time. I'm
which is just like
sorry.
maybe they should have prioritized that more versus this, and that's fair.
Exactly, because I think the issue here is, right, you look at how many people are watching it live or watch it immediately after. They don't think about the clips that come from it, the reactions that come from it. They're not they weren't really thinking about this network that exists in modern media.
On that, and in case she sort of makes in the book on kind of a different thing, but also I will say, like, they were really prioritizing like campaign events in the swing states, and Kamala's performance in swing states in the swing states, while she lost every single one, right? Famously, like, she performed she lost by 1 to 3 points in all the swing states, or like the ones that like would have flipped the election in her favor, whatever. And she often performed better in swing states than in non-swing states, like, which is why, like, the popular vote went the way it did, right? Was because of her performance in, like, blue areas was more red than expected, and in red areas was more red, less blue than expected, whatever, right? It would be sort of that. In which case, like, I think you can kind of say, like, well, she did really well. Like, the strategy worked, it just wasn't enough in, like, how much she was in focusing on swing states. But also, kind of going back to the last thing, she lays out in the book that, like, it was kind of Joe Rogan's thing that she couldn't go, because he would only do the show in Austin, I think, where he would only do it there. He wouldn't travel for it, like, he refused to, and they were trying to figure out which dates would work, and they didn't have a date where Kamala would already be in Texas, meaning she would have to sacrifice a day or more that she would be in a swing state to go to Austin, Texas, where she wouldn't have to be, because Texas wasn't going to go for her, right?
Yeah, but she clearly thought that was worth a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
Which
I would say maybe not, and then also, right, the bigger thing to me, which is that they finally figured out a day. They said, "Oh, we're both available on this day. Let's do it then." And then they said, "Okay, yeah, sure. Well, let's do it then." And then they came back. Actually, we can't do it. That's a personal day for Joe Rogan. And they're like, "Oh, okay. I guess it's not happening." And then the personal day, it turns out, was the day that Joe Rogan was doing the interview with Trump.
Mhm.
So I think Joe Rogan was like
Yeah, but it should have been.
I think it was them.
Well,
I
why
think she was
did
fucked.
we should have heard that?
Yeah,
Right.
I agree with that for sure.
Because it
And
came
I know
it came
I
across as
know we did hear
arrogant.
about it afterwards. I think we heard about it.
Yeah.
Maybe not like during the campaign, but like maybe a couple. Like we heard about this many months ago.
I
before
heard
this book
about
came
it.
out,
I'm
but also
sure
this
it's
book.
during the campaign we heard about that they couldn't agree on the venue because. But he always does his podcast from the same place, right? So I guess
Yeah.
he is
They
being
said like,
maybe
oh, he
semi.
traveled once to interview. Who was it? The leaker, WikiLeaks guy. That guy. They said that. Oh, but that was like a special case because whatever.
I can.
but then
There's an argument for it, even if it's disingenuous. You can still frame that as an argument, right?
yeah.
And Trump when Trump went, so you know, then it's kind of
Well,
like.
but the reason that that day was available for Kamala was because that weekend, I think it was, Kamala and Trump were both in Texas. Was like why it worked out.
Mhm.
So like it wasn't like Trump didn't go out of his way to go to Texas to do Joe Rogan. He happened to be Joe Rogan's team was in talk with both, and they chose Trump instead of Kamala on that day.
Yeah, I'm just saying how it can be framed and how it can
But
be
yeah,
seen.
I
and
agree with you that
it had
it
terrible
should have been way
optics.
more.
And the other thing is they started going on, it's because she can't talk for 3 hours. She's not really herself. And really, I'm thinking it's the complete opposite. And this goes back to the initial point about when she was talking off the cuff that I thought she was really good. And and it's probably why, like you say, that she did so well in the debates, or was it only one debate in the end?
She talks about specifically like particular interviews where she felt like she didn't perform as well as she could have. I think she talks about one interview that she did where like right after announcing that Tim Walz was going to be her VP, but it was also one of the first interviews that she was doing like for herself. That she wished that in hindsight that it wasn't a good idea for Tim Walz to be there. In hindsight, the venue should have been different because they like that it shouldn't have been them too because he looked so much bigger than her, like framed her badly. Like it's just she talks about very specifically about like here's the mistakes I did in this interview. I had an answer prepared, but I didn't say it, and I made that mistake. Like she kind of goes into that stuff.
Yeah, but I don't want to admitting to mistakes that weren't mistakes. I actually thought he was a really good choice, and I thought it was a good balance between.
I agree. Yeah,
and also
she never like says like, oh, I shouldn't have picked Tim Walz.
Okay.
It was in particular about that. I think also the only negative thing she had to say about Tim Walz in the book really was that he wasn't ready for like the debate with JD Vance because when they were preparing for the debate with JD Vance, they didn't expect JD to like fully mask up and pretend like Sane Wash himself / Trump's campaign by like acting nice, and so Tim Walz didn't know how to respond, so he just acted nice in response and didn't actually whatever. And also that he fucked up a couple answers during the debate, which I think is true.
Yeah. I mean, but yeah. So I mean, I thought it was a good balance of a down to earth. Be frank about it, a white guy, as sad as that might be.
She talked about like those are the reasons she picked him. Like all the finalists were white men. The reason she picked him, she talks about like very particularly. The last three candidates for her VP were Tim Walz, of course, Mark Kelly, who's a senator from Arizona. He's like the astronaut guy, and Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, I believe. She didn't pick Josh Shapiro because he was way too ambitious and it wanted to be way too involved, and it seemed like was wanting to use the VP position as a like stepping stone to president, which wasn't right for the campaign because like it had to be about her, not about the VP or whatever, and shit like that. And like she tells particular stories like he was like way too eager. He was like already talking about like how he wanted to decorate the vice president's house and shit like that. It was crazy. Mark Kelly she didn't want because she didn't think Mark Kelly was ready for like shit slinging because he had never dealt with that before. And she picked Tim Walz because he had like all the good like he was the opposite, completely not ambitious, was like very self-deprecating, but was super down to earth and had a really good record as a governor and shit like that. So
I thought he was great. I mean, he seemed ambitious for the US. He seemed ambitious for being a true patriot in a meaningful and positive sense. And some of it, he gave some amazing speeches. But that's actually a fourth point I could point out with regards to the Labour Party and learning from them, that there's some really ambitious people around Starmer right now, and they want to pull a Brutus on him, and that's possibly where the threats to his leadership will come from, this inner circle of.
And like there's something there because Tim Walz is very left, and like that was part of the thing even during the campaign. Tim Walz is history and Minnesota, I think, is where he's governor. Like he's very
Mm-hmm.
like successfully, but like he's very
Mhm.
left. Like they have like a lot of isn't like paid family leave and like a bunch of shit that's
Mhm.
like very left, but it's been successful. So he has a really good record there too, which was another reason they wanted him.
Well, that was why I asked you before. I mean, that was kind of what I was insinuating about, forget the polling and, who's most electable, but in terms of their politics, which candidate.
Oh, if Kamala's too left, I think she was way more left in the 2020 primaries, but I get the sense from reading her book and just in general, even her campaign, she's very pragmatic.
Yeah,
She did moderate. I think she like it wasn't just like pretending that she actually did moderate on a lot of reviews. And yeah, well, I think generally, yeah.
I describe these people as bridge builders. And
Yeah.
I think it's true in a lot of democracies that we need them because politics can easily go too far towards the center on average. And this is crazy. We have a one-dimensional view of politics anyway. But I do feel that people get too entrenched in their own ideological beliefs, whether they call themselves socialists or whether they call themselves centrists or even center-left.
Yeah.
If you look at all the different ownership model, if you want to really break it down to what it's often about, it's about which ownership model is better. And that's already a false question because there isn't one better ownership model or one best ownership model. It depends on the context. It depends on the point in time. So I think pragmatism is such a healthy anecdote for that. And so I
think she's very pragmatic. Like, I remember at one part of the book, she did famously like an interview where, I think it was The View, and she was asked by somebody on there, like, what would you do differently than Joe Biden or something? And her answer was, I can't think of a thing. And she talks about how, first of all, that was like really like fucked her a bit, which was because people want to change from Joe Biden. But also she talks about how.
But I don't think Biden. I think Biden was also quite good in this respect. That his own politics was further left than the way he came across.
Yeah.
It's just he didn't have the real power. He couldn't implement what he would like to.
Even just on that last thing was that she talks about how in like she answered that way like, oh, I wouldn't do a single thing differently, or she can't think of something different she would do than Biden, whereas she already had a prepared answer for that because obviously that was going to be a question that came up, but it just slipped her mind to answer and said she answered the way she did. But you said that she already had an answer, and I know she said it in other places as well, but that her answer to that question was like that she would appoint a Republican to her cabinet. And that was the difference. And so like when you're talking about like bridge building, like Kamala had kind of that like instinct at least, where or if even just for like she wanted to say that so that she could get some Republicans on board who would want to see that. Like I think that's that goes to like the pragmatism point. Like and like the moment I read that in the book, I was like, oh, who would be the Republican that she would have on her cabinet? I would imagine it'd be, if I'm guessing, it would be like Liz Cheney as Secretary of State or some shit like that. I don't know. Like it would be an anti-Trump Republican.
Oh, for sure,
like
yeah.
Or maybe not Secretary of State, but like something else.
And that goes back to our conversation earlier about sorting the system out. But effectively, what's a two-party system? You need a healthy opposition. It's no good Dems being in power and then having some crazy Republicans become even crazy. And go, hey, well that's great because they're going to kick themselves out of ever being in office. No, what you end up doing is just moving that window. What's the Overton window, right? Of views, and people start to take that in. Not to mention, there's always this right-wing bias of the media, unless, as Kafka was suggesting earlier, we can sort that out in all.
Which I think we should sort that out in the way that he was saying. But yeah.
Oh, that's what I've hypothesized. But then it's going to be immense backlash.
It's hard.
And if it's sometimes worth not fighting the fight unless you can win the fight.
Maybe.
And that's really.
I think you could do it, but even if it's hard.
I think this might create the opportunity
to
do it. Yeah, sorry.
Somebody in chat said way back, and really backtracking the combo, but he said, keep in mind that Trump made a football stadium of people sit in the cold waiting for him for hours. That's how Trump managed to go on the podcast. And that's also true. Because they both had events in Texas that weekend. That's why they could do it. But Trump literally made people wait so he could do Joe Rogan. So,
yeah, but
like you're saying, like, oh, maybe they should prioritize like podcasts more. But like by the time they realized that, it was already like you would have to cancel events, and like then it's like a whole other thing with.
Again, it's about priorities. I mean, one of the reasons I mention it is not just about the number of people that Rogan reaches, but the type of voter. Because you have these, I mean, Rogan is not like a diehard Republican, right? I mean, he voted for Bernie Sanders, and
I agree. I agree generally with what you're saying, but like he's a Republican. He's like,
well, he is now, effectively.
He's all in. Like that guy's. he's lost it.
Yeah, but
I think people overstate like how centrist he is, or like, oh, he was Sanders, or whatever. Like, he's a populist, and right now,
okay, but the
he's
reason
a fucking Republican.
yeah, but the reason he would say that is because that he knows that his listeners like to hear that, and if his listeners
Exactly.
like to hear that,
Yeah.
then some of his listeners are definitely of that ilk. And there's plenty. You see plenty of interviews. I mean,
I also think there's a lot more people who pretend to be centrist and are actually just But yeah, I agree.
I mean, there's a lot of people that said, "Hey, I voted for Obama and I voted for Trump." There's a lot. I've seen it. I mean, okay, it's anecdotal, but it becomes almost statistical. But
also, I'd also call those people retarded. But yeah, for sure.
Hey, I mean,
you still have to appeal to retards, kind of. So,
well, exactly. And then it's about the language in which you. I mean, you know, this is one of the reasons that the podcast does so well, because it is quite simple language, put in simple terms, and also leaves people prone to manipulation in this way. But yeah, that is that we have to accept the reality on the ground, and you know that goes back to the ideological issue. That goes back to all of the discussion we've had this evening of you know, what can what can be changed in power, what can we change in Germany compared to what can we change in the US. I mean, these can be different things. We always have to think not just where we want to get to, but how we get there and if it's possible. And sadly, often that just isn't the case. And that's why I generally like politicians with quite left-wing views, but don't necessarily end up even trying to implement them because they probably realize it's not realistic. It's frustrating then for them to be framed as, you know, you're not left-wing enough. But in practice, it just doesn't work. It's like the wealth tax, right? Which the Green Party in the UK are proposing. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Green Party leader actually interviewed Hassan, this guy named Polinsky. He's a very bright, charismatic guy. But he's pushing like the wealth tax as like the answer to all of the UK's funding problems.
Which is stupid.
Well, okay. And to be fair to him, he's now put it in stone as to what he expects. So it'll be a 1% tax over £10 million pounds worth of savings, right? It's not extreme, and I actually think, and I would argue for, and this is a bit of a hot take, I think it might be quite good, but it's not going to solve the problems. It's maybe part of the solution, but this is the issue. Like they're dressing this up as like, the billionaires are the problems. You've got one member of the Green Party that's reasonably influential saying, imagine Britain without any billionaires, wouldn't it be great? And I'm thinking, no, like you need all that tax revenue that you lose. That's insane. What are you talking about? And so they put all this focus on billionaires, which I do think is part of the problem. You know, the inequality you have in society, and I do think you could have a very moderate wealth tax that doesn't lead to flight of people of taxable revenue, because then you actually end up losing less tax. You end up losing revenue.
There's like a million reasons to be against it. Like maybe if it's reasonable, you could do it, whatever. But
exactly, but it's a dressing up of like these few policy positions as solving everything. And then you ignore actually other parts of the solution, some of which aren't.
That could do it.
Yeah, and like the fact that the state doesn't have infinite money, and some, you know, things that will be nice won't be able to be implemented, in terms of funding for, you know, children's activities at school, or, you know, having class sizes with 3 children per teacher or something stupid like this. It's just completely unrealizable, as nice as the idea would be. And I really do feel this is the problem with the further left of our parties, that they don't see the path to the end result, or if they do see it, then they're hallucinating. It really doesn't actually exist. And so I respect any politician that says, hey, the path's not there. Sadly, we can't go there. And I feel like Harris is a good example of a politician who would like to get there, but doesn't see the path there right now. So, I mean, to answer the question I gave you about, you know, with candidates, I think Harris is someone that's closer to me than Newsom. I think he's nearer the center ideologically. But in terms of optics and rhetoric, I mean, he's been pretty good as well. But in the end, it's about getting power first, and then you can make the changes. So, yeah, it's been good to talk to you. I mean, it's the first time we've really talked, right? And
it's good to talk to you. You seem like a cool guy.
And if you want me on again randomly for conversations about global politics, I'll
give you terms so you can join stream if you ever see me live and you want to come on.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
and we can talk about also the Russia-Ukraine conflict, for example. I've been to Ukraine a few times, and
Yeah.
I really care about that country. It's one of the reasons I
Yeah,
rate this.
with something like Ukraine, I'm very much like on certain things. It's like I don't even know that much about it. I know enough to know that Ukraine's right, Russia's bad, so I just don't even need to look into it more on certain things. So I'm sure
Yeah,
you'd
for
be
sure
able
on
to
that
like
front. I
educate
mean,
me on a lot more of that stuff.
I mean, that's
Go
all
into
good
talk
and
about
well,
that.
but it's about how we support Ukraine and the if there are limitations on that. So I wrote an article a few months ago, and to keep plugging pragmatic papers, but there we go.
Hell yeah, paste.
About the how much Europe can fill the gap left by the US, and there were some positive signs, but of course there's limitations. It's not about intent always, but sometimes it's about the capabilities and capacities. But I will say this, that in Germany, for example, there's a lot of apathy towards military support, and it's just this toxic form of pacifism that actually ends up leading to more conflict. And it feeds into the game theory thing of just capitulating. But there is a German problem in that regard. So politicians, have to toe a line of not being too overtly supportive. Yeah, there's more to talk about. Of course, Ukraine should be supported, but it's a question of how we support them, and that's and the limitations.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I feel like you went on Destiny stream to like talk about that a bit, and he kind of said the same thing I'm about to say, if I remember, maybe, or he said it at other times. But it's like I'm almost not even worried about how to support Ukraine right now because there's so many other things to be like, because Republicans won't do it, so it's like yeah. But like I'm very much like, as much as we need to give them, like fucking give them. Like for me, personally, like I give them everything, fucking whatever they ask for. But I'm sure you would be able to go more specific on what you think that is and shit. So
well, yeah, I slightly disagree with you that it's not something that the US should think about, and this shutdown has shown that Democrats do have more power than perhaps we initially thought.
Maybe.
And there are other methods of kind of legal disobedience that they can implement, with filibusters and such like, and really bending the arms of the Republicans that way, and they might get some concessions. And I would say one concession is maintaining that support for Ukraine. I think there is a quiet supporter in Marco Rubin, what's his name? The Secretary of State.
Mark Cuban.
Yeah, Cuban. Sorry. I think he quietly.
Marco Rubio.
Yeah. Marco Rubio, thank you, sir. He is, I think on our side on this, one of the few topics here. Of course, publicly can't be so overt in this regard. And I think, therefore, it'd be one of the topics that they could more easily, get some concessions out of MAGA about.
Maybe.
And without that, I mean, Ukraine falling, the US may lose a major ally.
Yeah,
in
it's
Europe.
it's like real bad if that happens.
Exactly. It should be reasonably prioritized. It shouldn't be just something extraneous. But
I agree, for sure.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today, Zip. And I really appreciate it.
I hope we'll be able to have you on next week. We will. I don't hope.
Okay, we'll have another conversation next week if it comes to it. So
but yes, for sure. And then I already gave you the role. You can always pop in if you see I'm live. You want to talk about something, or if you want to ever say oh hey, can we talk about Ukraine on this day? Like reach out, man.
It's just one idea.
On anything.
Yeah, I mean, you can, if you read any of my articles and you disagree with some of my perspectives, and
I should read the pragmatic papers more.
everybody should. I mean, yeah,
true.
It's really growing. It's really a good thing. And if you want to write for the pragmatic papers, especially after reading this book about Harris, it'd be really interesting to have your take on that.
For sure. After I go to her event next week, I'm gonna be looking into that a lot more, and I'll probably just write shit down.
Excellent.
Get y'all's help editing and shit. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch up soon. Yeah.
Right. Bye.
Okay, that wasn't really what was expected today. But next week it seems we'll have the debate with Connor. Clearly the dates were a bit mixed up. We didn't give it a date. We just said next Thursday. I guess it was a bit ambiguous. So this debate on the tit for tat strategy and with the Destiny's right will happen next week. And if anyone's been watching this, then appreciate it. Please like and subscribe and share the channel. I will try and get more content out soon. I think I will also do some content on game theory. I also want to give a kind of synopsis of or an overview of my own politics. That's something that could be interesting. I want it for my own reference as much as anybody else's, about where I stand on particular policies, which politicians I think are ones to watch and ones to support and show a good trajectory. And that could be in various countries across Europe and the US in particular. Yeah, so there's a lot of ideas I have in this regard. So yeah, if you've been watching the stream, then thank you. I really appreciate it. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.